massive billboard fell, killing 14 people. A large billboard in India collapsed the other day due to severe raging thunderstorms, and it sadly killed 14 people and injuring another 75. A rescue operation took place on Tuesday morning, and Indian authorities said they rescued 89 people since the accident occurred. The rain and wind caused by the storm made the 100-foot tall billboard fall onto a gas station in a suburban area. You can find videos on social media of the billboard shaking back and forth before giving away and falling onto the gas station, crushing people and cars. The video isn't graphic, but knowing what happens to the innocent people when the billboard falls and hits the gas station make it a very eerie and disturbing watch. But if you want to find it, you can easily watch it on X. Keep in mind, this billboard was 100 feet tall, so it was like a literal building falling onto these people. 32 people who were injured from this unfortunate situation have already been discharged from the hospital, but many more are still in there. May everybody rest in peace who died in this unfortunate situation, and may the surviving people with injuries have a speedy recovery.
One of the most disturbing movies that's out right now, The Human Centipede.
Oh my gosh, I've heard about this shit and I have not watched it, and I don't want to watch it, bro.
A little like backstory of like what goes on.
The whole lore.
Human Centipede 1, basically it was this crazy doctor, and he was obsessed with making a human centipede connect a human
To another human.
from rectum to mouth to rectum to mouth. Somebody ate something, they digested it, they would eat it, the other person would eat that, and then it would just...
Oh my god.
The shit what the first person ate would eventually travel out of the last person. So
Well, why? Did they ever say why he wanted to do it?
bro, it was just like...
Just because?
Yeah, that's what he liked. But the second one is a guy who's a security worker, and he's obsessed with the first movie.
Oh my gosh, don't...
To the point where he like masturbates to this, just the thought of a human centipede, and he just goes on a spree, gathers his victims, and ends up killing a couple people. Eventually his fantasy becomes
true,
and he recreates
The movie.
in real life.
How the do people come up with... How many movies are there of this shit?
3? I only seen 2, and the second one's a little bit more disturbing too, because it's like it looks so low budget. It's black and white.
What's the scene that's embedded in your head that you're never gonna forget?
The final scene of the second movie, bro.
What happens in the final of the second?
Basically, he feeds them out of a bowl. Well, nobody's using the bathroom, so what he does is he injects them with laxative. Yo! You start.
One employee killed another employee execution style down in the tunnels, and then he came over here to the power plant and he shot himself at the base of the stairs. I promised Colin to show him the saddest room on the sanatorium.
So this is all stuff from actual patients.
85 to 90% of the people that were here involuntarily, and they didn't want to be here. Being up here by yourself is terrifying.
Something in the hindbrain is screaming, do not go in that building. Don't go in that tunnel. The heebie-jeebie factor is just off the charts.
We're the scariest place in America, the Indiana State Sanatorium.
One just went out. Down here.
Girl, dude.
This room is draining everything. Are you like trying to close the curtain? Are you filming this? Yeah.
Dude, hold behind you, dude. What? Look at
That's crazy.
So he's dying.
Anybody? Now that's definitely a hot spot,
Dude,
is it not?
Dude, it looks like a person.
The bear fell off.
Okay.
You must leave.
Apologize now. Here.
God, what the? He died and then cooked himself in a hot room, and it says when they came to get him away, the meat just came off the bones.
This man disappeared from the middle of a music festival after sending some very strange texts. It was 2018. Kevin Graves was a 28-year-old from Michigan. He had 3 siblings and was an all-round really nice guy. He was in a relationship at the time and the pair were living together. As many young couples do, they decided to book a music festival together. Now this was called the Electric Forest Music Festival in Rothbury. However, the festival has a bit of a reputation, as many festivals do, for having quite a lot of substances there and also some crime. Regardless, the couple headed there on the 27th of June that year. He remained in contact with his siblings and his parents throughout the festival. Nothing seemed to be amiss. That was until the morning of Sunday the 1st of July. Now this was the final day of the festival. His dad received some weird text messages from him quite early in the morning. It was 7:55 a.m. and one of the messages said, "I love you so much for your service, Dad. Thank you for your service." His mum tried to text him later that morning to kind of check if everything was okay and asked him if he had a nice time. The reply back was simply the word nothing. Shortly after this, communication stopped. Now, the day after this, on the 2nd of July, Kevin and his girlfriend were due to go home. However, she called his parents with some alarming news. They'd had an argument the day before and he'd vanished. Now, the argument was apparently due to Kevin being paranoid and accusing her of cheating on him. His phone and belongings remained at the campsite, but Kevin was nowhere to be found. Searches were fruitless, and even dive teams got involved and found absolutely nothing in the local bodies of water. No one has ever seen him again. There's been no activity on his bank card since he vanished. A $10,000 reward is currently being offered for any information leading to the discovery of Kevin.
Dark side of Shirley Temple.
Oh my gosh.
She was born around the time of the Great Depression. So obviously desperate. They needed money and stuff. They kind of exploited Shirley Temple. Taking any fucking role, no matter what it was,
Or what she had to do.
they were taking the roles. At the age of 3, she ended up playing War Babies, right? It was just a bunch of kids and they were playing adults. They were playing soldiers. And she had a role as an exotic dancer.
You're lying, bro.
No, this is dead ass. It's out, bro. In all these movies, there was a bunch of other kids. Obviously, when you're a kid, they do bad shit, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is that the directors themselves would punish the kids. The black box.
Fuck was the black box?
You were put into a little room with like the noise canceling like foam walls. There was an ice block on the floor and you would have to sit on it. She obviously started getting older and shit. And there was this one guy. She thought that he was like a big executive, a movie producer and shit.
I went into the office of Arthur Freed and he was going to talk to me about a movie he wanted to put me in. I'm 12 years old, and I thought he was a producer, but instead he was an exhibitor. And I'd never seen anyone naked before, except myself. I had no clue about what was happening. So it struck me so funny, I laughed at him. And I laughed uproariously. I had tears, and he got infuriated. And he said, out, go.
A string of murders in Portland, Oregon have now officially been linked and connected back to at least one person of interest. This is everything we know so far. Last month, Portland police shut down online speculation about a possible serial killer in the Pacific Northwest, but now they state otherwise. Concern sparked after 6 women were found dead either on the side of the road or in wooded areas near Portland since February. After news of a possible serial killer went viral, Portland police shut down the rumors, but on Monday, the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office officially announced that the mysterious deaths of these 4 women, Kristen Smith, Charity Lynn Perry, Bridget Webster, and Ashley Reel, are all connected and have been linked to at least one person of interest. The DA's office hasn't officially named the suspect, but many other local agencies say the person of interest is 38-year-old Jesse Lee Calhoun. Jesse has an extensive criminal history and was reported to be living in the area at the time of the murders. He's been in the Snake River Correctional Institution since July 6th on unrelated charges, and he has not yet been charged in the 4 deaths. All 4 victims were found dead between February and May in different locations throughout Oregon. 22-year-old Kristen Smith was reported missing on December 22, 2022. Her body was found on February 19th in southeast Portland. The body of 24-year-old Charity Lynn Perry was found on April 24th in a culvert near East Historic Columbia River Highway. 31-year-old Bridget Webster was found 6 days later on April 30th on an isolated road in Polk County. And on May 7th, the body of 22-year-old Ashley Reel was found in a wooded area in nearby Clackamas County. The Oregon State Medical Examiner is still working to determine exactly how all 4 victims were killed. No other information, including how the person of interest was linked to all 4 victims, is being released at this time. According to the DA's office, investigators were working with 9 different law enforcement agencies in Oregon for several months. And although no charges have been filed in connection to the murders, they state that they believe there is no active threat or danger to the community. Anyone with information is asked to contact the numbers on the screen.
Less than 2 hours after that video was filmed, the girl on stage in that video would be dead. Her name was Christina Grimmie. She was a famous singer here in America and she was murdered in 2016. So Christina had been making music and performing all of her life, but her real rise to fame started when she was on the show The Voice. After Christina was on The Voice, the world kind of opened up for her. She made her major label debut, she started going on tours all across the world, and she was a rising star. Sadly though, she attracted the attention of a very disturbed individual who can actually be seen here in footage from her final show. creepily watching Christina perform from the crowd, knowing what he was about to do. That man was 27-year-old Kevin James Loibel. So Christina's performance that evening ended at about 10 p.m. And afterwards, she moved over to a little booth to sign autographs for people who had come to the show. At around 10:24 p.m., Kevin approached Christina. Christina, thinking he was just like every other fan there, opened her arms up to give him a big hug. But that's when Kevin retrieved a Glock pistol from his person and shot her 3 times at point-blank range. After the shots rang out, Christina's brother tackled Kevin to the ground. Yes, sadly, Christina's brother was there working the booth with her that evening. But after a fight, Kevin managed to get himself free, he retrieved his Glock, and he took his own life right next to Christina's body. Sadly, Christina had been shot twice in the chest and once in the head. And by 10:59 p.m., not even a full hour after she finished her performance, Christina Grimmie was pronounced dead. Afterwards, Kevin's family left this note for the media. This was all they had to say after the tragedy. But fans even to this day remember Christina as an amazing singer and talk about the potential that she had if she hadn't been taken from this world so quickly. If you want to listen to more true crime stories, check out the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife, Courtney. You can listen to it on any streaming platform.
Ever heard about the Facundo cemetery incident?
Nah, I haven't.
There was this Mexican comedy TV show called Incognito. Well known, well loved. 2006, it would air its Halloween special that had many of the Latino community shook.
Why?
So it had Facundo, one of the hosts of the show, explore a cemetery, and it was supposedly haunted, and he sees a girl.
Like a little girl?
Yes, but his reaction seems so genuine that it doesn't seem fake, bro.
He's by himself?
Yeah. He does have crew with him as well, but they're like at a base camp.
It's already scary, bro.
¡Manifiéstense! ¡San maricas! ¡Hagan algo! Y con todo respeto para los muertos.
Shit. 15 minutes after he said that.
First of all, he's fucking like bugging for even going to that cemetery, bro.
Amiga, ¿cómo te llamas?
Oh, man.
Amiga. Niña. Ay, no seas imbécil. ¡Con lentes! ¡Davor! ¡Venga, güey! ¡Venga, güey! ¡Por favor!
And hearing the scream is crazy. Imagine being him and hearing that shit.
Bro, I'll be sucked, bro, again.
Bro, booking it.
Bro, I'll book it.
What's one true crime case that keeps you up at night? Mine is the disappearance of Patricia Lee Otto, and I went down the rabbit hole with this case. On August 31st, 1976, 24-year-old Patty Otto returned to her home in Lewiston, Idaho with her 2 young daughters after an evening business class. She tucked them into bed in the basement, and then she was greeted by her husband, Ralph. Patty's class went late that night, and it upset Ralph. It made him think that she was out cheating, so an argument broke out. Ralph was pretty controlling and abusive, and he was also an alcoholic. Their 3-year-old daughter Suzanne woke up to the commotion and snuck upstairs, and the last thing she saw was her dad strangling her mom, who was wearing red pants and a white shirt, before Patty was dragged out of sight. And that was the last time anybody saw Patty, as she mysteriously disappeared that night. A few months into the investigation, Ralph was reportedly annoyed with being bothered, so he hired a contract killer to murder the lead investigator in his wife's disappearance. But this contract killer was actually an undercover cop, so instead, Ralph was arrested and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Fast forward 2 years into Patty's disappearance. A woman's body was found in a shallow grave in the woods near Elgin, Oregon by a father and son who were out elk hunting. The woman, who became known as the Finley Creek Jane Doe, fit Patty's description to a T, right down to the red pants and the white blouse that Patty was last seen wearing. But before anybody could make a connection, Oregon State closed Finley Creek Jane Doe's case, even though it was an unsolved homicide, and had her remains destroyed. They were then transferred to a different funeral home and never returned, and they've since been deemed lost. By the time Patty's daughter Suzanne learned about this, it was 2 years ago, and she only found out because she she stumbled across the composite sketch of the Finley Creek Jane Doe online and realized that it looked identical to her and her mom. Her father, Ralph, was the prime suspect in Patty's disappearance, but he died in 1983, taking all of his secrets to the grave. There's a lot more to this case that I couldn't fit into one TikTok video, so if you want to learn more and if you want to hear directly from Suzanne, I interviewed her for the first episode of my podcast. Please help spread awareness, and even if you don't want to listen, just share this wherever you can. Patty was silenced in 1976, and she deserves justice.
This pedophile committed a crime so disturbing that a petition was created that asked the government to publicly hang him, and the petition gathered thousands of signatures. This is 33-year-old Benjamin Taylor from West Virginia, and in 2016 he would commit one of the most sickening crimes I've ever read about. Back in 2016, Benjamin was living with his girlfriend, a woman named Amanda Adkins. At the time, Amanda had recently given birth only 9 months ago to her baby daughter, Emily. Emily was a beautiful young girl. And I want to warn you all right now, the details that we're about to discuss are some of the most disturbing I've ever covered. So in October of 2016, Benjamin had only been living with his girlfriend Amanda for about a month. And on the morning of Emily's death at around 4:30 a.m., Amanda woke up and went downstairs to search for her baby. When she went downstairs, she saw Benjamin Taylor with his pants unzipped sitting in the dark. Amanda then noticed that her 9-month-old daughter's limp body was lying nearby on a pile of sheets and laundry. Amanda screamed at Benjamin and grabbed her daughter's lifeless body, but he remained silent and stared at the ground. The details of what had just happened down there are disturbing. Local authorities would call this the worst assault that they had seen in decades. You see, Benjamin and Emily were covered in the infant's blood. After the child's body was examined, the authorities were able to determine that she had been assaulted by an adult male multiple times. The infant child was also bleeding extensively and had suffered head trauma. Emily had a fractured skull and brain hemorrhaging. Authorities believe that Emily may have been shaken violently, or even thrown to the ground or slammed against a hard object. When police arrived at the scene, Benjamin Taylor was observed trying to wipe something off of his groin. That was eventually determined to be Emily's blood. He also told authorities that he remembered taking the baby to the basement, but that he blacked out after that. You see, he had been smoking and drinking the night before, and that was his excuse. Thankfully, Benjamin was convicted of all charges and sentenced to life in prison without mercy, as you can see right here. But for some people, that just wasn't enough. And like I said at the beginning of this video, a petition was created which asked the government to publicly hang Benjamin. And this petition, before it was shut down, gathered over 50,000 signatures. I mean, this truly is one of the worst things that I've ever covered here on my TikTok. And personally, I don't think that life in prison is enough for this guy. I mean, the pain that poor Emily went through before she was eventually killed is just heartbreaking on every single level. And I just hope and pray that the other prisoners that are in there with Benjamin find out or already have found out exactly what he did to land himself in there. If you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife, Courtney. It's available on all streaming platforms.
This man was going to plant flowers and grow food with this man's body. On December 24th, 2019 in Michigan, a 25-year-old man named Kevin Bacon was talking to another man on the dating app Grindr. Kevin was a hairdresser and was going through tough times in his life. He was trying to save money to move somewhere else so he can get a fresh start. Kevin told his roommate that he found someone on Grindr and that he was going out for the night. The doorbell camera shows him leaving around 5 p.m. and sadly, this was the last time he was ever seen. The next day was Christmas and Kevin had planned to have breakfast with his entire family, but concerns started to grow when he didn't show up. After he missed the breakfast, his family called his cell phone, but there was no answer. They then went to his apartment, but Kevin was nowhere to be found, and fearing the worst, his father called the police to report him missing. Friends, family, and police searched neighboring towns, forest areas, and farmlands. For 3 days, the group searched for Kevin in hopes of finding him alive or clues on where he could be. They then found Kevin's car parked outside of a store, and inside the car was his phone, wallet, and some of his clothes. The police checked his phone and found messages with Kevin and another man, and it was the man he met on Christmas Eve. The police used this information, which led them to a house where a 51-year-old man named Mark Latunsky lived, and on the 28th of December, the police knocked on the door and conducted a search of the whole property. Mark invited the police in and was wearing no shirt and only a brown leather kilt. The police then went around the house and made their way into the basement where they found a secret room. And inside this room, they made a truly horrifying discovery. Mark had strung up Kevin by his ankles with rope, and chunks of flesh were missing from his body. Kevin had a stab wound on the back of his neck and his throat had been slashed. And also, Kevin's testicles were missing, and Mark used a knife to remove them and then deep fried them and ate them. After finding Kevin in this awful state, Mark was arrested and then he told the police his version of what happened. He told them the two of them met on December 24th after talking on Grindr. They agreed to meet in a parking lot, the same place Kevin's car was found. He then said that they agreed to act out a fantasy Kevin wanted to try. Kevin stripped naked and put on a blindfold, ankle restraints, and wrist restraints. They then went back to Mark's house where they had consensual sex, and after, Mark claimed that Kevin told him he wanted to end his own life. Mark then claimed that they agreed he would assist in killing Kevin, under the condition that Kevin's body would be used for a purpose. Mark said he used the knife to stab Kevin in the back of the neck and then took him to the secret room and strung him up with rope. He then opened up a trap door underneath where Kevin was hanging from and slit his throat. The blood drained from his body and dripped onto the dirt outside from the open trap door. This was done so Kevin's body can fertilize the plants outside the house. As part of the agreement, Mark said he would use Kevin's bone marrow to plant tulips, his intestines to grow chestnuts, and would use his muscles to make human beef jerky. Mark also admitted to cutting off Kevin's genitals and eating them. Mark is a father of 4 and a highly intelligent man, and he even earned a master's degree in chemistry. But he had many mental health issues like depression, anxiety, and even paranoid schizophrenia. He had medication that could help him with these issues, but his ex-wife said he refused to take them. Mark's story did have some inconsistencies though. While the two were texting on Grindr, Kevin had asked for a reassurance that he would be safe during the meeting multiple times. There were no signs that Kevin wanted to be hurt or killed by Mark. Mark even had other victims too who escaped, but they didn't suffer the extent Kevin did. Mark's husband of 3 years, Jamie Arnold, told the media he had no idea of Mark's mental health issues until July 2019. He said he suspected something was wrong with him, but didn't think he was capable of committing such a disturbing act. Jamie left the house in September and didn't live there during the time this happened. Mark was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for committing this awful act. This is just honestly disturbing, and it goes to show that you have to be careful with who you talk to online. May Kevin rest in peace. He did not deserve this at all.
This is one of the most unsettling and baffling unsolved mysteries I've ever heard. This is the creepy case of the Yuba County 5. It was February 1978 in Yuba County, California. A group of 5 men between the ages of 24 and 32 were about to travel to Chico for a basketball game. Now, the group all had learning difficulties but were well prepared for the trip ahead. The men were Bill Sterling, Jack Hewitt, Ted Weir, Jack Madruga, and Gary Mathias. They made it to California State University for the basketball game and then tried to head home. Now, this was the 25th of February. They all got back into the car and drove to downtown Chico, where they stocked up on snacks for the journey ahead. This was at around 10 p.m. and the shop assistant specifically remembers the group coming in because she was actually a bit miffed that they'd come in as she was just trying to close. When they failed to return home the next morning, they were reported missing to police. Now, it took a few days before an eerie discovery was made. The car was found 70 miles from where they'd last been seen. Now, strangely, the car was kind of up a mountain at this point. It wasn't on any direct route back to their home. The car was also in perfect working order, so it wasn't like they'd broken down or anything and had to go for help. There was also a full tank of petrol. Now, inside was food and drink wrappers, indicating that they'd eaten those snacks that they'd bought from that shop. It seemed that the car had got stuck in snow, but the snow wasn't exactly deep, and these were 5 men who would have been more than capable of pushing the car out. Local news stations broke the news, and one tip came in of note. This was a man called Joseph who owned a cabin near where the car was discovered. He said he'd actually also been stuck in snow around that area at the time that the boys vanished. He saw headlights in the distance and saw a car with a group of individuals kind of huddled around the car, and he swears that one was a woman holding a child. He said he tried to get the attention of the group, but they all kind of just walked off. Then there was another devastating discovery. This time it was months later as the snow started to melt. 4 of the 5 men's bodies were found. Although some bodies had been disturbed by wild animals, autopsies confirmed the men died of hypothermia and Ted had died of starvation. Now this actually raised way more questions than answers. Ted's body was found inside a trailer and the length of his beard indicated that he'd actually survived for months after they vanished. Ted's shoes were interestingly also missing too. Now the men were found near a campsite which had plenty of food and warm clothing if they were struggling with the weather conditions. They could easily have accessed this, so why didn't they? As for Gary, his body has never been found. So what happened to these men? Why were they up a mountain? Did they take a wrong turn? Why didn't they eat the food nearby? Why did they abandon the car? How did Ted survive so long? I would love to hear your theories, so please pop them in the comments.
A new cartel video was released a couple days ago and it's absolutely brutal. As this cartel war is heating up, another video was released on May 6th, 2024. A disturbing piece of propaganda was released by one of the cartels depicting the brutal execution of a rival cartel member, which shows the current brutal situation between these two cartels. The video is 1 minute long and it was recorded in the middle of the night and in the middle of nowhere. As you start the video, you see the captive who is lying on his back on the ground and is being held down by 3 cartel members. One is holding him down by pressing a shovel against his chest, another is holding him down by the shoulders, and the third is pressing the victim's head against the ground. It's also apparent the victim has already been tortured because at least one of his ears has been cut clean off. The cartel member holding the victim's head down is also carrying what looks like a penknife and it's pretty small. And as the captive is being held down, the cartel members begin to mock him. And one of them says, "Okay buddy, you're next," and then jokes and asks the fellow cartel members, "Is this how it's done?" while placing the knife on the victim's throat. And his fellow cartel member responds, "Yes, that's exactly how it's done." The cartel member with the small knife then starts slicing back and forth on the victim's throat as well as pulling underneath his chin and covering his mouth with his hand. The victim then lets out a horrible groan as the blade causes him to wither. The knife is very blunt and takes a while to pierce the man's throat. The cameraman then gets close to the victim's face and you see his eyes dart around the area in complete panic. The cartel member then keeps trying to cut him and eventually the blade cuts into the victim's throat and blood begins to leak. The victim's eyes then bulge open as he is experiencing this awful and excruciating pain. The cartel members then continue to mock the victim, and the cartel member who is cutting the victim's throat then pulls underneath his chin harder, and it causes the gash on the victim's neck to widen, and the blade then penetrates the windpipe. The victim then closes his eyes in pain, and you hear the sound of wheezing and bubbling blood. The cartel member then brutally twists the victim's neck right and left as he cuts the sides of his neck. And as the cartel member hit the carotid artery, blood begins to pour even worse and puddles on the ground. And this also causes the wheezing and bubbling blood sounds to get even worse. The victim's neck at this point has been cut so deep that it doesn't even hold the head onto the body with any strength. This then allows the cartel member to twist the head back and forth with ease. It's absolutely gut-turning. A cartel member then says, "Look how nice that wet works looks," which is another word for a beheading. Another then says, "Look how nice that blood looks pouring out." That's exactly how it should be done. The sounds of wheezing and bubbling blood can still be heard, and although the victim's eyes are still open, they stopped moving. After twisting and turning the head, the cartel member then tries to stab his way through the spinal cord from the front of the neck, and it's a very close-up view, and this is where the video concludes. These cartel videos are releasing quite often this year as the violence picks up, and they are just disturbing, and the violence and the videos don't seem to be stopping anytime soon. But as always, I recommend to never watch or search for these videos. They are just brutal and you don't want to see them.
Hammer coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
Girl took deadly revenge against her parents but was not expecting what happened next. Jennifer Pan was born in Ontario. Her parents were Bitch Hay Pan and Hue Han Pan. They both made a huge effort to provide for Jennifer and give her the life that they never had. They soon started earning a lot of money down to their hard work and had fancy cars and a lovely home to show for it. Now, they were quite strict with Jennifer and it seemed to work. She was very good academically, but also was a really well-liked girl. She did have hopes of being a professional skater, but these were unfortunately becoming less likely down to an injury. She really struggled to come to terms with this and started harming herself as a way to cope. When she was around 16, she started dating an older guy named Daniel. That was until he got kicked out of school for having substances in his car. Jennifer's schoolwork started to suffer, and although she was initially offered a place at Ryerson University, they withdrew this. To cover this up, Jennifer started lying to her parents about her grades. She even started forging her report cards. When she was due to start uni, her dad gave her a brand new laptop. In order to keep up with the lie, she actually started leaving the house as if she was going to classes. Now, the next bit really reminds me of the Casey Anthony case. When Jennifer's graduation would have been due, she told her parents that they couldn't come because she only managed to get one ticket. Jennifer pretended to have graduated and also pretended to get a job at a children's hospital. However, her parents soon wised up to her lies. They confronted her and asked her why she didn't have a uniform or ID if she did in fact have this job. They took her laptop off her and also banned her from seeing her boyfriend. This all went on for about 2 years, with Jennifer's resentment towards her parents growing and growing. She finally got her laptop and phone back when she was 24. Now, despite having been banned from seeing him for so long, Jennifer reunited with Daniel. The two concocted a plan. They planned to kill Jennifer's parents and make it look like a botched robbery. Now, Daniel had connections with a hitman named Lenford. He agreed to kill the parents for a payment of $10,000. On Halloween 2010, the plan started to gain traction. On the 8th of November, Lenford confirmed that he was ready to take action. He texted Jennifer saying, "After work, okay, will be game time." That night, Jennifer intentionally unlocked the front door of her family home. She said goodnight to her parents, knowing that their gruesome end awaited them. Around 10:05 p.m., 3 men entered the house. This was Lenford with 2 others, David and Eric. The trio ambushed the house and tied Jennifer up to make it look like she was a victim too. They actually strapped her hands to the banister. They then grabbed the parents and after covering their heads, they shot them. The group ran from the house and Jennifer rang police at this point. However, she was not expecting what happened next. Her dad was miraculously alive. He'd somehow managed to survive the shooting. He was in a coma though until the 12th of November. Now, meanwhile, police were interviewing Jennifer about the series of events. They thought it was very strange that she had somehow managed to ring police despite being tied up. Jennifer's dad also confirmed once he was out of his coma that Jennifer appeared to be talking to the men like she knew them. Jennifer obviously hadn't considered how it would look to her parents in the moment because she thought that they were just going to be killed. Under increasing pressure from police, Jennifer finally confessed. The following year, the group of hitmen were also arrested. In 2014, Daniel, David, and Lenford got life sentences with no possibility of parole. Jennifer also got the same sentence. Eric's trial was deemed a mistrial, but then he was given 18 years in prison. He actually died in prison in 2018 after having been stabbed by his cellmate. In a shocking turn of events, Jennifer appealed and was granted a new trial for the murder of her mum. The Supreme Court of Canada is currently in the process of determining if it will review the case.
I chopped off the hands and heads of my victims with an axe. How many victims did I exactly make? I know it very well. More than 85 and less than 100. It's me, Richard Cottingham, also known as the Butcher of Times Square. Between 1967 and 1980, I ended the lives of 6 people with a terrifying brutality. In broad daylight, I played the role of a good husband, a father of 3 responsible children, and an IT guy considered a model employee. However, when night fell, I donned a wig, took on a fake name, and set out hunting prostitutes in the streets of New York. My penchant for psychological torture was evident. I enjoyed taking my time, playing with my victims. Each of my actions was meticulously calculated. Hotel rooms became the stage for my dark designs, where, to avoid identification, I chopped off the hands and heads of my victims with an axe. For years, I roamed the nighttime streets with impunity before finally being apprehended. The sentence was harsh: 268 years in prison for the rape and murder of only 5 women.
You heard about the man who vanished mid-flight? And of course you know that's what this week's episode is about. So in 1928, Alfred Lowenstein was on a small plane heading from London to Brussels. When about halfway through the flight, he gets up out of one of these seats and heads towards the back to the bathroom. Eventually, he's back there for so long that someone gets up to go check on him. Except when he gets back there, Alfred's not in the bathroom. And the only sign he had even been there was his tie, which was on the floor. The man looked around and saw that Alfred was not on the plane anymore at all. To better understand what could have happened, we need to look at the layout of the plane. So this back of the plane is separated from the rest of the plane by a door that closes. And if we look at it even closer, you'll see that here on the left is the bathroom, but here on the right is the door to the outside of the plane. And when the man went to go check on Alfred, he said that this door was unlatched. There are so many theories as to what happened to Alfred. Did he accidentally go through the wrong door? Was he pushed out of the plane? He was the 3rd richest man in the world at the time. Did he orchestrate his own disappearance? We are doing a full deep dive on this story this week on the pod, and I'm doing it with Murder with My Husband, so you don't want to miss it.
His mother posted this cryptic message on Facebook before vanishing. 25-year-old Michaela Standridge was last seen in Concrete, Washington on the 21st of April 2023. Disturbingly, she vanished after running away from the house she was staying in and calling 911. Michaela is a single mother of a 2-year-old son. She'd been staying in Skagit View Drive and at 5:04 a.m. called the police. Worryingly, she was heard on the line screaming and shouting for help, but the phone went dead. When police arrived to the location that she called from, she was nowhere to be seen. She completely vanished and has not been seen or heard from since. Investigators found her phone near the river near the house that police had arrived at. Searches were undertaken of the river and surrounding area, but no luck. Concerningly, 5 days before she vanished, she posted this cryptic message on Facebook. It read, "If I ever go missing or anything, just know I didn't leave." Michaela's case remains unsolved and she still has not been heard from, so police are urging anyone with any information to get in contact with them.
If you've ever gone into a rabbit hole about the Paris catacombs, then you need to hear about the Palermo catacombs, because I would argue that they are even more terrifying. These catacombs are from the 1500s and they have 1,200 full mummified bodies, unlike the Paris catacombs, which only has bones. One of the most famous bodies inside of these catacombs, and just a heads up, this is pretty intense, is a 2-year-old girl named Rosalia Lombardo. This is a sketch of Rosalia. She was one of the last people to be placed inside of the catacombs, and she is in near perfect condition. Rosalia died in 1920 of the Spanish flu, and her father specifically asked that she be placed inside the Palermo catacombs. And because she never really decomposed, there's photos of her from the 1980s where she looks just like a sleeping child, even though at that point she was 60 years old. In 2009, she started showing signs of discoloration, so they put her in this hermetically sealed glass case. The next slide has a photo of her just to illustrate a phenomenon that had been happening, so just a heads up. Before she had been put in the glass case, guests would actually complain about seeing her eyes open, which was shocking to them because she was in such perfect condition, but they could actually see how crystal blue her eyes were. Like, they definitely weren't hallucinating this happening. Employees explained that it was just a trick of the light. Her eyes actually hadn't fully closed, so depending on how the light was, her eyes looked more open or more closed. But some people are so afraid of seeing that happen that they refuse to visit the catacombs. Would you ever go?
Took the life of my pregnant wife and my 2 daughters to start a new life with my mistress. My name is Christopher Watts, and on August 13th, 2018, my wife's best friend went to my home and alerted the police because my wife was not responding to her calls. The police arrived promptly, and I allowed them to search my house. But of course, they found no signs of life from my wife, Shanann Watts, or my 2 children. The police, surprised by my lack of concern, I simply told them I didn't know where she was. Very quickly, the FBI identified me as the prime suspect in this disappearance. I then pretended to make a plea for help. A few days later, I was interrogated and I was subjected to a lie detector test. But I quickly broke down after failing the polygraph, confessing everything to my father. After that, I placed my wife's body in the back seat and drove my daughters to an oil site. I first smothered Bella with a pillow and then my second daughter, Celeste. I then buried the bodies in 2 oil tanks. I pleaded guilty in November, and on November 19th, 2018, I was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole.
This woman was burned alive in a car this year, and her murder is still unsolved. Mercedes Vega was just 22 when she was last seen on the 16th of April this year. Security cameras actually captured her walking into her apartment's parking garage just after 9 p.m. She had planned to go out and meet with friends, but never actually made it to her car. The following day at around 1 a.m, officers responded to a call about a car on fire. Tragically, when they arrived at the scene, they found Mercedes' burned body. She was found in the back seat of the vehicle, and interestingly, it wasn't actually her vehicle that she was in. The vehicle was found at the side of Interstate 10 in Tonopah. Interestingly, her car was actually found abandoned near Mill Avenue in Tempe. The owner of the car that she was found in has still not yet been determined. According to the medical examiner, she had been tortured, shot in the arm, and had blunt force trauma to her head. She was also found to have traces of bleach in her mouth, and horrifically, it was determined that this happened while she was alive. She was found to have passed away from being burned alive due to smoke inhalation. Items were recovered from the car that she was in, including lighter fluid and gloves. Disturbingly, her case is still unsolved, and her killer or killers are still walking free.
Killed, raped, and ate a student, and was never convicted of it. My name is Issei Sagawa, and I'm known for committing acts of unspeakable morbidity in 1981. The son of a wealthy Japanese industrialist, I was sent by my father to France to study literature at a prestigious university in the capital. On June 11th, 1981, I lured into my apartment a Dutch student from my university, René Hartevelt, then aged 24. To do so, I pretended to need help recording a poem in German, a language René mastered. As she recited the poem, I pulled out a gun and shot her in the back of the head. The whole scene was recorded on a dictaphone. I then raped her and extracted 7 kilograms of her flesh to eat. I took her nose, lips, tongue, arms, thighs, genitals, and anus, which I consumed cooked or raw over the next 3 days. During this time, I took a multitude of photographs that today bear witness to my actions. I then separated the rest of her body into 2 suitcases, which I intended to dispose of in the woods. But a couple noticed my strange behavior and alerted the police. I was arrested 3 days later and claimed the act was artistic. I also told the police that if I'd had a freezer, they wouldn't have found me. My case caused quite a stir at the time, all the more so as the abolition of the death penalty was voted through a few months later in France. As I was then considered to be suffering from psychiatric disorders, and therefore not criminally responsible under French law, I was never convicted and was interned in a hospital before being transferred to Japan. As the case was dismissed in France, I was never convicted in Japan, where I became known for my actions. I died last November at the age of 73.
That TikToker named Rory Teasley was murdered the day he posted that chilling final video. So, a little bit of a backstory. Rory was known on TikTok as 22 Pump for TV. Before his tragic and unfortunate murder, Rory had amassed over 265,000 followers here on TikTok. As you can see, his videos got a lot of views. He was just posting this wholesome, positive content that he wanted to brighten people's days. So, Rory lived in Pontiac, Michigan, which is nearby Detroit. But unfortunately, on January 6, 2022, Rory's life would be ended abruptly. On that day, Rory was playing the game Overwatch with his boyfriend, DeQuinn Watkins. Now, at some point during the gameplay that evening, DeQuinn and Rory got into some sort of an argument. And DeQuinn just took this a step far and began to strangle Rory. Eventually, this ended with Rory being strangled to death on the couch in his home. And later that evening, DeQuinn called 911 and reported that his boyfriend was sleeping on the couch and wouldn't wake up. When authorities arrived at the home, they found Rory lying unconscious on the couch. When he was taken to the hospital, yes, he was pronounced dead. So this trial happened pretty quickly, and just this year, DeQuinn pled no contest to second-degree murder charges, and he was quickly sentenced to 15 to 99 years in prison. It's unclear what caused this argument over a video game to escalate into a murder, but sadly Rory died that day, and people online are still trying to preserve his memory by reposting his TikToks and sharing his story. And yeah, this is just another tragic TikTok story that obviously did not need to happen and should never happen.
When 10-year-old Katie Coleman was murdered, she got revenge from beyond the grave. Katie walked out of her home in Indiana on January 25th, 2005. Her mum had asked her to go to the dollar store to pick up some toilet roll. She'd walked this route thousands of times before. Sadly, this would be the very last time. It wasn't unusual for Katie to stop by a friend's house on her way home, but when she hadn't returned home by 7:30, her mum Angie became concerned, and after walking the neighbourhood and finding no sign of her daughter, she called the police and reported her missing. Over 100 people joined the search for Katie, and a witness came forward to say that they'd seen Katie the day after she disappeared in a white Ford pickup truck with a man. A composite sketch of the driver was released to the public, and he was described as a white, thin male, about 5'8", and between 18 and 21 years old. On January 30th, 2005, 5 days after Katie went missing, her body was found in a pond near Cypress Lake. Her hands were tied behind her back, she'd been raped, and then discarded like rubbish. A witness later led police to a man called Anthony Stockelman, saying that it was his truck that Katie had been seen in. Police questioned him, and after doing a polygraph test, he passed it, and they had to let him go. Just a couple of months later, police managed to trace DNA from a cigarette butt found near Katie's body back to Anthony, and he was arrested and charged with Katie's murder and rape. Anthony received a life sentence for murder plus 30 years for rape after accepting a plea deal to take the death penalty off the table. The twist in this story that nobody saw coming was that Anthony was on the same wing with Katie's cousin. Jared Harris learned that his cousin's killer was on the same wing and repeatedly threatened his life, and on September 22nd, 2006, he slipped into Anthony's cell brandishing a tattoo gun. He held him down by the throat and tattooed the words "Katie's Revenge" across his forehead, a permanent reminder of what he did to an innocent little girl.
This is the disturbing UK case of the child who killed a child. In July 2018, 8-year-old Alicia McPhail was abducted from her bed. She had been staying with her parents on the Isle of Bute. She'd gone to sleep watching Peppa Pig, and no one had any idea of the horrors that would unfold. Meanwhile, 16-year-old Aaron Campbell was drinking with friends at his house. It's reported that Aaron became upset in the night due to arguing with his mum. He'd had a challenging upbringing involving alleged physical and emotional abuse. Aaron decided he would get some substances from a couple he knew. The couple in question were Alicia's dad Robert and his girlfriend. They were actually known to sell substances around the area, but Aaron couldn't get hold of them. Intending to steal the substances, he armed himself with a kitchen knife and headed to their house. This was Robert's house, where he lived with his parents and girlfriend. When Aaron arrived, he noticed the little girl sleeping and took the opportunity to do the unthinkable. He snatched little Alicia from her bed and carried her to a secluded location. He essayed her and killed her. He then threw some of his clothes into the sea. At 6 a.m. the next day, the grandparents of Alicia noticed the little girl was missing. They rang police and alerted the locals. Family actually texted Aaron and asked him to keep a lookout for the little girl, and he responded by texting, "Oh damn, I'm sure she's not went too far." A local man soon discovered the lifeless body of the little girl around a 15-minute walk away from the house. It was Aaron's mum who actually checked the CCTV footage from her house and noticed her son leaving their home and returning that night. She handed the footage over to the police. Aaron was arrested, and it was found that his DNA matched the clothes recovered from the beach. The kitchen knife was also recovered, and Aaron's mum confirmed it was from her kitchen. Aaron's Google history showed that he had searched "How do police find DNA?" and also visited a website about collecting DNA evidence. He was given a life sentence of 27 years, which was reduced to 24 on appeal.
This TikToker named Bethany Martin was arrested after stealing jewelry off a corpse. I am not kidding, this story actually happened in Texas in 2021, so let's look into it. So that video that I showed you was a real video that 17-year-old Bethany Martin made and posted on TikTok. So obviously this would be a concerning video to see just from the beginning, but when you learn the details of what happened when they found said body, you're going to be disturbed. So on July 26, 2021, Bethany Martin, who was 17 at the time, and a 16-year-old friend of hers went out for a walk. While they were on this walk through a recently developed neighborhood, they saw something strange in a drainage ditch and went to go check it out. And what they found was the body of 25-year-old Marcus Adams, pictured here. He had recently passed away after taking his own life in the area, and his corpse was just down there in the drainage ditch. No one had found him yet. So a normal person would call the police, right? But no, not Bethany and her friend. So what they ended up doing was stealing jewelry from the dead man's body. So the girls actually reached down and unhooked a medallion and a gold necklace from Marcus's neck. And while they were doing all of this, they filmed it and posted it on their Snapchat story. This was a public video that anybody that was friends with them could watch. And there is footage of this out there. It's extremely disturbing, so obviously I'm not going to put any of it in here. But yeah, and when you watch the video, you can tell that they're not treating this seriously. They're laughing, they're making jokes, saying, "Oh, I can't believe we're doing this, ha ha ha," laughing. I'm like, they're robbing a dead body. And then they post these TikToks. So after that video from Snapchat began circulating, it eventually worked its way into the hands of the police, and Bethany and her friend were taken into custody. From the outside looking in, Bethany seemed like a totally normal girl. And like I said before, she was a TikToker. She had 50,000 followers. But now she's been charged with robbing a corpse or grave. I couldn't find anything online about whatever actually came out of this, but if anybody knows the resolution or the end to the story, please let me know.
What? Nothing there, mate. Nothing there. What? There's nothing there.
This 20-year-old murdered his family a day before this photo was taken. Alan Ruby, a freshman at the University of Oklahoma in 2014, murdered his entire family, and the next day he drove down to Dallas for the OU Texas football game, where he stayed in a hotel with his friends and posted this photo on his Instagram in what I assume would be an attempt to build an alibi. It didn't work, and he quickly confessed and received multiple life sentences. Shortly after the arrest, Alan confessed to the triple murder. He said he stole his father's gun and approached his mother in the kitchen, and when his mother Catherine turned to him, he shot her in the head. After she fell to the floor, she still showed signs of life, so Alan advised that he fired a second shot into her. Catherine Jr., his sister, was washing her car outside when she came into the kitchen. Alan then shot her once. He informed investigators that he believed she had died instantly. Alan then waited for his father to come home from work around an hour later. And as soon as his father John entered the home, Alan shot him in the head. He said that his father said ouch as he fell to the ground. He noticed there were still signs of life, so he shot his father once again. Alan said that after the murders, he took the surveillance footage from the home recording system and fled to the University of Oklahoma in the Jeep that his father bought him as a gift. He then went to a party at the Ritz-Carlton. According to Alan, he had been motivated to commit the murders because he had been cut off financially by his family, and was also being investigated for having stolen and forged $17.5 thousand worth of checks. Alan stated that he believed if he killed his family, he would inherit their estate. Alan Ruby would eventually plead guilty to 3 counts of murder and was sentenced to serve 3 consecutive life sentences without parole and no contact with his family or with the media. His family had requested the life sentences, and according to District Attorney Jason Hicks, if they had not done so, he most likely would have been sentenced to death. If you're wondering, the purpose of Alan not having contact with his family or the media was to avoid the possibility of a book or movie deals where Alan would profit. This woman created some of the worst videos on the internet. This is Ashley Richards from Houston, Texas. In 2015, she pleaded guilty to 4 counts of producing and 1 count of distributing these disturbing videos I'm about to explain to you. This all started in 2012 when the group PETA, or the group known as the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, contacted the Houston police about a video they had found online. This film was titled Ebony Kill Cat, and it depicted extremely sadistic and cruel acts being forced upon a kitten. So the police got in contact with the people from PETA, and they then sent them an additional 20 videos. These videos depicted the sadistic torture of various animals, including kittens, a fish, pigeons, crayfish, mice, and a rabbit, all being tortured with different things like high heels, knives, screwdrivers, and also pliers. In the videos, the woman that appeared in them was wearing a Mardi Gras style mask, and she would talk suggestively to the people watching this torture, meaning that there were people actually out there paying to watch this sadistic stuff happening, and also paying the woman to produce these horrific videos. And the worst part about these videos is that she would urinate and slowly torture and chop up live dogs, cats, rabbits, and mice. Absolutely inhumane stuff. Eventually, the police would track Ashley's IP address, which led them to her suburban home in Houston. This then led them to Brent Justice, who were the two people producing these horrible videos and selling them on a website online. And Congress had recently passed a bill making this specific type of video material, otherwise known as Crush P, illegal, so thankfully these two were arrested. But Brent Justice, after the trial, was actually sentenced to 50 years in prison. However, Ashley, the woman who actually carried out these acts on camera, was only sentenced to 10 years in prison, which is just insane. This case is absolutely sickening, and both of these people definitely deserve life sentences. I'm usually good with true crime cases and disturbing stuff, but when it comes to animal cruelty, it just hits different and more shocking, honestly. This is just crazy, and I can't believe people actually do this.
What kind of mother drives their 6-year-old child to the highest bridge they can find and then throws them off the edge? This kind. This is Gillian McCabe, and this is the murder of London McCabe. London was born in 2008 in Oregon to parents Gillian and Matt. In 2011, he was diagnosed with severe autism. He was described by his teacher as an animated, expressive little boy who was full of love. He loved to sing and make people laugh. London was the centre of his parents' world. But when Matt was diagnosed with MS, it all became a bit too much for Gillian, and in 2014, she began researching ways to kill her son. Prosecutors would later use her search history in her trial. On November 3rd, 2014, Gillian put London in the car, drove to Yaquina Bay Bridge in Newport, walked him to the edge, lifted him up, and threw him over the side. She then calmly walked back to the car, and as she heard her son's body hit the water, she dialed 911 and told them what she'd just done. Police had to then ring London's dad Matt and ask him to corroborate the story and make sure London wasn't with him. They then had to tell him that his son was missing, presumed dead, after being thrown off the edge of a bridge. Boats and divers were dispatched, and just a few hours later, London's lifeless body was pulled from the water. The most horrific thing is that the fall didn't kill London. It broke his bones, but what ultimately killed him was drowning. Gillian was arrested and charged with murder. Her internet history showed that she'd searched things like temporary insanity, insanity defence, and different ways to kill a child, such as stabbing or dropping from a 133-foot bridge, the exact height of the bridge that she dropped London from. Medical records showed that she'd admitted herself into hospital a couple of times, claiming that she was suffering from mental illness, but that she was given a clean bill of health both times and discharged. Prosecutors in Gillian's trial said that London's murder was carried out with much calculation and that she'd faked mental illness in the hopes of getting off with a lighter sentence. Gillian was found guilty and was sentenced to life with a minimum of 25 years. In a statement from London's dad Matt, he said, "I can't say enough about this boy. He was my pride and joy. He was the centre of my world, and his loss leaves a hole in the centre of my universe. If you know an autistic individual, they need love too, probably more than you and I."
This is 3 Guys, 1 Hammer, one of the most sickening videos on the internet explained. Before I begin, I just want to say never go searching for this video. 3 Guys, 1 Hammer was leaked to a United States shock site in 2008. On your screen right now are the killers. The video begins with a man riding a bike down a street when the killers kick his wheels and strike him with a hammer off the bike. The poor victim was just going for a normal bike ride, but it ended up turning into one of the most brutal murders ever. They then take the victim into the woods where the victim is lying on the ground, and it's very clear the victim has already taken a lot of damage. He is semi-conscious and clearly has been struck in the head and face with a hammer. The video then continues to the 2 boys taking turns smashing the victim's face in with a hammer. And the victim's face is just progressively getting worse and worse. It's as if you got a pack of strawberries and just stomped on it. That's what the victim's face looked like. It was completely caved in and red and was 100% unrecognizable. There was blood bubbles as he tried to breathe, his face was just completely mangled and smashed. And if I'm not mistaken, they also put a cardboard box over his head. And the worst part is, the victim was in and out of consciousness throughout the entire video. Also, the sound of him trying to breathe with all the blood and his disfigured face is absolutely horrible. The killers continue hitting the victim in the face with the hammer. They then take out a screwdriver and begin stabbing the victim in the stomach countless times, and then the one killer takes the screwdriver and begins stabbing the victim's eyes out, all while he's still alive. The victim then tries to cover his eyes, which shows that he's still conscious, which is just so unsettling to watch. The killers put this guy through pure hell. I could only imagine the fear, loneliness, and pain the victim had to be experiencing. Eventually, the killers got bored and just wanted to finish the job, so they hit the victim in the head with the hammer a couple more times, extremely hard, which ends up killing the victim. Another disturbing part that stands out to me in this video is that at one point you can hear a car passing by, which turned the killers completely quiet until it passed. And once it did, they just continued brutally murdering the victim. The victim's name was Sergei Yatsenko, and he was just a normal guy going through his normal day when these demons just decided to do this to him. It's just pure murder with no motive at all. Never go searching for this video, please. Everyone who watched it never watched it again and urges everyone not to look it up. It's not the gore that makes it one of the worst, it's the pure evil these kids possessed. Because why in the world would you do this for fun? Rest in peace to Sergei, and I can't believe sickening stuff like this happens.
This woman screamed, "I don't want to die," as she was dragged to her death in a horrifying theme park incident. Kelty Byrne was a Canadian student animal trainer and competitive swimmer. She was working at Sealand of the Pacific to earn extra money, and this involved being trained to work with orcas, otherwise known as killer whales. In controversial theme parks such as Sealand of the Pacific and SeaWorld, huge animals are either bred in captivity or traumatically captured and ripped apart from their families and natural habitats for humans' entertainment. On February the 20th, 1991, Kelty was working a shift and 3 whales were in one of the pools, including the infamous Tilikum. In a horrific turn of events, Kelty accidentally slipped and fell into the whale pool and attempted to grab onto the edge and save herself. However, before she could do so, she was grabbed by one of the whales that dragged her into the pool. The 3 whales then began throwing Kelty around, with many speculating that they may have simply thought this was a game. Others theorised that the whales were so traumatised and angered by their lives in tiny little pools that they took it out on Kelty. She was dragged under the water and then back up, screaming, "I don't want to die." After this horrific ordeal, she eventually drowned. It's reported that she was absolutely covered in bruises, was completely battered, and also covered in teeth marks. If I didn't know this was a true crime case, I would think it was a disturbing horror film. On the morning of the 7th of October 2022, a barefoot woman was running around Excelsior Springs, Missouri, bashing on people's doors. Witnesses describe her looking like she came straight from a horror film and she was calling for help. She'd been beaten, held captive, and SA'd for weeks. The woman was a shocking sight. She was covered in injuries and was wearing a bin bag. Disturbingly, she was gasping for breath as she had a very tight metal collar locked round her neck. It was a nurse who opened the door to her and let her come in. The nurse started to call police, and at this point the woman panicked. She warned her that the captor would kill her and claimed that he had killed her 2 friends. When police got there, the woman explained that a man called Timothy had captured her the month prior. He'd been holding her hostage this whole time. She said he'd been keeping her locked in the basement and had been SAing her. Disturbingly, she told police that he actually had a young son who lived at the house with him. When Timothy had taken his young son to school the one day, she used it as her opportunity to escape. Police made their way to the home of 39-year-old Timothy Haslett Jr. and found the property did in fact have a basement like the woman described. Timothy was arrested and is facing 9 charges, including first-degree kidnapping. He's being held on a $3 million bond and faces 5 life sentences. Before his arrest, police were actually called to his address 3 times. Twice they were asked to do welfare checks, and this was from an employer and also family members. Police have searched his home with cadaver dogs and they haven't yet released what they know.